You're listening to Releasing Trauma, a survivor's podcast. And now here's your host, Tracy Osborne. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Today, we are talking about reclaiming your ethics. So this is going to be a really interesting topic. It's not something that we talk about on the show very often, and I'm really excited to dig in and kind of talk about this and uncover what this really means. And joining me today is Dr. Christopher Gilbert, who is the author of The Noble Edge, Reclaiming an Ethical World One Choice at a Time. So, Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Like I said, it's a real privilege.
Well, this is exciting for me. I love when we kind of stray off the normal path on the show a little bit. It makes it a little more fun for me. So, let's talk about, what does it really mean? What do you really mean by reclaiming an ethical world? What does that mean to you?
You know, somehow we've gotten it into our heads that the world of ethics is about great philosophers or higher education academics or religious leaders that know so much more than we. And I wanted to get off that track and say, no, actually, as it turns out, we can look at ethics in very simple ways that actually create solid ground underneath us to make the right kinds of choices more consistently. And so the idea of the book and my work is actually almost like ethics coaching, teaching people some very simple tools so that they can create a world that increases their trustworthiness. And quite frankly, that also increases the trustworthiness of the people around them, because by example, we actually all want to trust more than we do. It's just that the world seems to pollute a lot of that.
Oh my goodness. Isn't that the truth? And trust is one of those things, for some people, it's freely given, and for others, it has to be earned. And so, yeah, it's kind of that sticky area.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, in a lot of my presentations or seminars, I will ask people there what they think the greatest human virtue is. And for the most part, the major answer is love. It's a great answer, by the way. But I always get people to pause and think about it a little bit. Well, if you think about it, even love, the foundation of love is truthfulness and trustworthiness. So you couldn't possibly have a deep, loving relationship with someone that you didn't trust or that didn't trust you. So in fact, if you look at it, I think trustworthiness is actually the greatest human virtue, because in fact, it underscores or is the foundation for all of the other human virtues. So in that regard, being able to think about trust and trustworthiness and creating that trustworthiness in different ways, especially given the moral toxicity of the world around us, it seemed like it was a good idea to try and spread this message as far as possible.
Absolutely. So, when it comes to ethics, I think we all have a code of ethics that we live by. And that seems to be different for everybody as far as maybe the order that we put them in. And maybe I'm getting this wrong, but it just seems like there's kind of a standard of ethics for most of us. Be honest, be truthful, don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, don't kill nobody, that kind of thing. Am I correct in that?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. If you think about it from the perspective of there really are universal ethics, it's just that we don't always follow them, and we can often think about them as my ethics or a group of just us culturally or in society, our ethics versus others' ethics. And again, the message that I've been really touting for the last 25 years in my work and is in the book is that if you think about it, only universal ethics that we all understand and try to adhere to is going to create the greatest opportunities in the world. Trustworthiness is the foundation of our greatest personal freedoms. I know there are a lot of people these days that sort of tout freedom and rights in the same sentences. But a freedom or liberty without responsibility is anarchy. And so what we have to do is think about that freedom or that set of rights in the context of what it means, not just to ourselves, but to others as well. And that actually starts to walk us down that path of thinking about ethics from a universal and not a relativistic, which is what you were kind of describing, this sort of idea of relativism, which I think is one of the greatest problems with ethics today. I think any ethicist you talk to would probably say the same thing. The idea that somehow we've got our code of ethics and they work for us, and here's this other group somewhere else, and they've got their code of ethics and it's 180 degrees from ours. But since we're making our choices with our code and they're making choices with their code, it's all ethical. And the problem with that is it takes us out of the idea that ethics are supposed to tell us what's right and what's wrong, and universally what's right and what's wrong. So the folks that say, well, ethics are gray, it's so complicated, that sentence is really like saying I'm sort of pregnant. Or I sort of voted, or I am, or I'm sort of human. Either you are or you aren't, you did or you didn't. And ethics are really there to show us what's black and what's white, what's right and what's wrong. Now, that's not to say that the situation might not be very fuzzy, very foggy. And so it's hard to see the right and the wrong. And even sometimes the system we're in doesn't allow for the best, most moral choices in a sense. So the idea that foundation, that solid foundation is there, is really what the book is trying to attempt to give tools for people to sort of see and understand and try and make the best set of choices with that idea. And we're all starved for solid ground to make those right choices or to make ethical choices.
What does that really mean, ethical choices? So I'm sitting here thinking back to, I think it was either high school or college when I took an ethics class, and they gave you these scenarios and you're supposed to tell them, okay, well, what's the right thing to do? How would you react? And oh God, that class was a nightmare. But, so how do you know that you're making the right choices?
Yeah, a really, really good question. And I'm going to sort of harken back to the research I did when I was getting my PhD in leadership ethics, and also my experience in the classroom. I was a business professor for about 18 years. And the thing that you're describing, maybe I'll say something that makes it a little bit easier. One of the things that I found in my research that I had suspected, but I didn't have any data for, so PhD gave me that idea, research to get some data, is that people who have received formal training in ethics, morality, whether it be in the classroom or the boardroom or the family room, but classroom and boardroom are more formal, the people who've received formal training actually wind up making lower level moral choices than the people who have not received formal training in ethics or morality in the classroom or the boardroom. And what that is an indictment of the very process you were talking about with they give you scenarios and you've got to make a choice. It's an indictment about the people who teach it. Me as a professor or a teacher in K through 12 or a consultant in the classroom or facilitator, because we don't teach with the idea that there is solid ground to stand on to make choices. What we wind up doing is taking a look at all of the perspectives or platforms upon which you can make an ethical choice. I'll give you a couple examples in a second. And we tell people, all right, so this person made this choice and they thought it was right for this reason. This other person made this choice and they thought it was right for this reason. And instead of people walking out of these classrooms or these boardrooms with a solid understanding that there is a way to be able to make choices that all of us can really look at, they wind up having all of these perspectives in their heads. And I don't think they wittingly think about it, but they make a choice and then find the perspective that says it's ethical, rather than having a perspective that they use to overlay on all the ethics that they do. So my book is also about, in the work I do, kind of an indictment that we need to make this simpler than we do. It's great to understand those perspectives. And like I said, I'll give you an example of a couple in a second. But that's not going to necessarily help us to make the right choices. You were saying the class you were in was a nightmare because you probably got to see these different perspectives, like relativism. We talked about that. It's ethical here, but it's not ethical there. But that's okay because we're following that ethics. Or consequentialism. We focus on the consequences. Listen, the ends justifies the means. We may have hurt these few people, but in the end, millions got vaccinated or whatever the relation is. And again, these perspectives sometimes are mutual one another in terms of making a choice. Go on here, but so part of the answer in my book is to think about moral choices as like a step ladder, the 3 steps of a step ladder. At the first step, every choice you make is about you, or you can say it's about me. I'm either trying to gain a reward or I'm trying to avoid some kind of punishment. So the choices that I'm making at that step I justify because that's the focus. That's my motivation. I'll give you an example, simple one. You're driving down the freeway, policeman pulls you over, comes up to the car. You know you were speeding. He knows, she knows you were speeding. They walk up to the car, you roll down the window and they say, do you know how fast you were going? Well, heck no, I want to avoid the ticket. So I'm not going to say, yeah, I was probably doing 20 miles over the speed limit there, officer. No, what we do is we come up with some excuses. We try to avoid that ticket and we rationalize that untruthfulness is just fine because it works for us. Never mind the people I put in danger on the freeway or the kids that are in my car that I might be putting in danger or whatever it is. The speed limit law is there and we're supposed to follow it for a lot of good reasons. So that's the first step. It's about me. Second step, it's about some of us, the people I care about, my family, my church, my community, my Boy Scout tribe, even my nation compared to the other nations of the world. It's about some of us. I'll give you a quick example. I go into a store, I get $20 extra change from the store clerk. They just miscount and I get $20. I get home and I discover I got $20 extra. Well, I can rationalize it. I can rationalize it easy at the first level. It's about me because I got $20 extra. This is great. Who's it going to hurt? Or I can rationalize it at the next level. Well, you know what? This is going to help me pay rent. This is going to help me pay for the higher food costs I've got or for my heating bill this month. I can keep that $20 because I rationalize, well, it's about some of us, me and the people that I care about. But in the end, of course, it's the wrong thing to do. It's not your money to make a choice about. Even if you gave it to the homeless person, or took it to Goodwill and said, hey, here's some extra cash that I've got. You still spent someone else's money and didn't ask them if that's the way they wanted to spend it. So the final step, and I'll stop and let you ask some questions or comment. The final step is it's about all of us. That's the highest moral level. And what I mean by all of us, it's about everyone who's affected now or will be affected in the future by the ethical choice that I'm making. And I need to sort of enlarge my radar screen and begin to think about those other people, all of the other people that are going to be affected by the choice I make. And this finally gets to the answer you asked. How do we know whether the choice is right? Well, one litmus test is to ask how many of the people that are going to be affected by the choice would say, yeah, go ahead, do it. This is great. That I agree with that. Go ahead and do it. The more people there are, the more you're considering, the closer you get to being able to make an ethical choice.
What does how does personal feelings come into play? So you ask, okay, how many people are going to be affected by this and what would they say? But also, what about how am I going to feel after I make this choice? Am I going to, rationalize it and be okay with it? Or am I going to, it's going to start eating at me eventually? Because back in the back of your mind, taking that extra $20 was wrong, and it's karma. So where does personal thoughts and feelings and emotions come into play?
Yeah, it's another great question. They're very important, obviously, because the person that we wake up with in the morning and look in the mirror as we're brushing our teeth or shaving, it's me. I got to live with me. And sometimes it literally just comes down to moral courage to be able to make that right choice. If you're only making choices based on personal feeling, then you're really sitting at that first step, right? The lowest step of the moral ladder. It's about me. Because in the end, I want to feel good about whatever it is that I've done, even though that might violate somebody else's rights or somebody else's trust or something, because I feel okay, or I could ignore some of the things you're talking about. That's down the road. I won't think about it now. But you're right. This all eventually comes back to you because you have inside of you a clock to be able to make right and wrong choices. And for the most part, I think it's about 18% or more, 85% or more, people want to trust in almost every situation that they're in. It's one of the reasons why, if you've been paying attention to any of the shows on TV now about Anna Delvey in New York and defrauding people of millions of dollars, or what's happening with Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, where she's been convicted, but she's going to be now sentenced for the hundreds of millions that she was defrauding of people. I think for the most part, we have ulterior motives when we're looking to trust somebody else But the real nature we have is that we do want to trust. We do want to believe people that are there. And you think, frankly, at your deepest relationships with others, absolutely, I want to trust my mate or my partner or my children. And teaching them how to tell the truth and to trust others is also a very important part of parenting. So you sort of have to all throw those into the hopper. And again, sort of step up that moral ladder from, well, it's about me and my feelings to, okay, they're important, but what if this was happening to me? What if someone was doing this to me? Would I still feel just great about it? My guess is probably not. So the more you can personalize ethics, step into the shoes of the person you might be affecting, or the closer that person is to you, the more we have a tendency to make right choices.
That makes a lot of sense. It really does. Now, you've got, some tools and stuff that you incorporate into your daily routine. Do you have other tools other than, the step ladder that you talked about?
Yeah, that's probably the most important, because it turns out my research also was able to show, even if you have just a knowledge of what that set of stairs is, it winds up affecting the way that you can think about choices. But there are also other things in the book. I call them, for instance, the ethical acid tests, where you can ask yourself some questions at the time that might help you see the black and white of that ethical situation. Like, for instance, if you're about to take an action, would you want to see this on the front page of tomorrow's social media page or in the New York Times or whatever news you get in whatever way? Would you want to see your picture and the headlines about you making that choice in the newspaper? If the answer is no, then that probably is a pretty good indicator, a spotlight on the kind of choice you're making. Or if you're making that choice, would you think about your children making it? Is it okay if my partner or my children make the same decisions? I'll teach them how to do this as well. Well, again, that kind of brings it to home and go, well, no, I hope my kids never do this. And what can I do to make sure that they don't? There are in the book a bunch of these ethical acid tests, which are very simple questions. You can just memorize one if you want, and think about those when you're about to make a choice, because again, it turns a spotlight on sometimes to the areas that seem a little gray, or where your personal feelings in making this choice are seemingly way more important than the personal feelings of all the other people around you that are affected by that choice.
You mentioned, what about my kids making that choice, and it got me thinking about the choices that I have made in the past. If my kids made those choices, I would not be a happy parent. That's for sure. And so how do I avoid my kids making those choices? And that for me is by being honest and telling them, hey, I did this and this was the consequence. And I don't want to see you make that same choice. So, here are options for you. And I think honesty and openness play a huge part in trust.
Absolutely. And of course, we all know that our children notice things that we don't imagine that they notice. They pick up on things that we never believed they would pick up on, right? So they're sponges when it comes to this, among other things, comes to this understanding of what's right and what's wrong, what's a lie and what's not a lie. I'll give you another one. What's gossip? I mean, the kids sitting in the car listening to mom or dad talking on their cell phone to somebody else about the neighbor or the coach at the soccer class or the teacher at the thing, and they wouldn't want other people talking about them that way. But we're full of the world that relies on this idea of gossip and getting my feelings out, and I'm not going to go to the person I'm concerned about. I'm going to go to my friends and kind of comment to them about how wrong this is. All those things become a part of the child's sense of ethics or moral development. Maybe it's important to sort of talk about those two words, ethics and morals, for a second. Probably the simplest way to think about this is morals are the agreements we have, the discussions we have about what's right and what's wrong. Ethics are the actions that we take after we've had that discussion to determine what's right and what's wrong. So you can think about it in this way. Morals are in the talking and ethics are in the walking. Right. So that's one way to sort of think about it. Like semantically, we use them, the same way all the time. And I'm not going to go swimming upstream, but there is a difference between morality and ethics. And so if you think about it that way, talking and walking, sometimes it helps. And so if we want our children to walk in that regard, we're going to have to both talk and walk in that regard, right? With a sense of trustworthiness, because it's so important to their health that they come to understand what's right and what's wrong. And by the way, you mentioned before, you made some choices is, haven't we all made some choices that we wish nobody would make? And sometimes that's the only way that we learn.
Yeah.
You think about it not only as an individual, but a society. 9/11 was a terribly tragic event. And yet, after that event happened, what used to be 3-minute sound bites on CNN about the Middle East and far away, we suddenly realized, no, this is about something much larger and something that we actually are involved in. The disparity, for instance, between rich nations and poor nations, or rich individuals and poor individuals, that drives a lot of the actions around the world. I'm not saying that those weren't wrong actions. I'm just saying that that tragic event, like, for instance, the terrible mistakes we make that might be tragedies in our own individual lives, also happen at the societal level. And that helps advance society as well. The nice thing is we could always make those choices well before the tragic event happens. Sometimes we just don't do it, and the tragedy has to occur for us to see what the right path was to take.
Yeah, that's true. That is so true. Well, Chris, thank you so much for coming on and talking with me today. This has been really fascinating.
Oh, you're very welcome. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm definitely going to have to get a copy of your book and dive into that. So thank you for that.
It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Just look up The Noble Edge, and there's all kinds of reviews. We've gotten 15 awards for the book now. So that's really been very exciting. And you can get it even at your own brick and mortar bookstores, which we're great supporters of as well. So again, Tracy, thank you so much.
Absolutely. And listeners, I will have all of his information in the show notes, the link to the book and everything like that. So just go to releasingtraumapodcast.com and pull up Chris's episode, and it will all be there for you. If you are listening on your favorite podcast app, please be sure you give us a like and a follow. We'll talk to you in the next show. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure you hit subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss a show. Be sure to check us out on our new socials on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.